Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever this message gets to you. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Jeff Wenninger, author of On Thin Ice, a LAPD officer for 33 years. I've had the pleasure of speaking with him very briefly before I started off this episode. Really nice guy. You can just tell that he has quite a bit of emotion on his tongue, very collective, articulate, and he's going to have a story that is going to hopefully impress some people, but also give a new relationship about what law officers deal with, how they have to hold their heart behind their badge, and quite a bit of the time they're not able to always express their emotions. Jeff, how you doing today?
I'm doing just fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Mhm. So, Jeff, you served in the LAPD for 33 years. Do you remember like the beginning of when you became a rookie?
Well, I do. I went out to Los Angeles primarily initially to just get 5 years of law enforcement experience because I wanted to be a professor of criminal justice. My father was a sociology professor, and I wanted to follow him into academia. So he encouraged me to go get 5 years of experience, saying that it would enrich my studies and it would make me a much more credible professor. So when I went out to Los Angeles, I had some cautionary warnings from my father. Actually, he went to University of Illinois, where he got his PhD, and he studied the police departments in regards to the professionalism of law enforcement. And this was back in the 50s. So he was a bit familiar with law enforcement and the challenges that law enforcement faces on a daily basis. And although he allowed me to maintain my objectivity, to experience what I was going to experience on my own without him clouding my perspective, he did give me some cautionary notes. So, I went out to Los Angeles. The reason I chose Los Angeles, and I don't know if people remember the movie Colors with Robert Duvall and Sean Penn, but in college, you're get impressed by odd things that will help um, dictate your decisions and your judgments. Then I thought that was a really cool movie because it dealt with Crash, which is gang unit with the LAPD, and I thought where better to go than to Los Angeles, and that's why I chose Los Angeles. But as life would have it, I ended up staying for 33 years, and I took a lot of my personal experiences growing up, which are rather unique. Um, I was adopted. My mother was a teenage mother, put me up for adoption. I lived in a foster home for a short period of time. And then I was adopted by my parents. And I have a brother who's also adopted. He's Japanese. And then my parents fostered a sister of mine who's black. So I was raised in the 60s and 70s in the Midwest in a multiracial family. So what I saw in the experiences I had in that is what I took into my law enforcement career. So very different than my peers, I would suggest, in how I saw race. Because I can tell you when I was growing up, when I was young, I don't remember looking at Vanessa and seeing a black girl. She was just my sister. And, we played and got along and argued just like all siblings do. And the same can be said about my brother. Um, he wasn't a Japanese kid to me. He was my brother. And I actually didn't really see race, believe it or not. Um, but I was exposed to what I would call like micro um, racial aggressions towards my mother. When we would all be grocery shopping, and people behind the veneer of a smile would say things, like, "Oh, your kids all look so much alike," kind of like a dig at my mother. And I was too young really to understand it at the time, but looking back, it was the poise and grace that my mother handled those types of instances with that really impacted me as a young adult when I was taking on, my first experiences in law enforcement. So, that was really big in what I recall impacting my initial experiences in law enforcement. But I also was an elite hockey player. I played Division I college ice hockey on scholarship, and there's a leadership experiences that I took into my law enforcement career from hockey that influenced how I perceived and saw things, as well as the discipline that it requires to be able to perform at that level. Very few people get to that level, and it's not just about having some natural talent, but it's the dedication and commitment, and the wherewithal to stay committed to something, to be able to perform at that level. And where more was that important than in my law enforcement career, I felt. That wasn't always necessarily shared, because I remember I went in the academy. There was 157 recruits initially. We graduated 107, and when it's all done, they pick an honor recruit. The honor recruits, identified by your peers. They vote as well as the training staff, and I was number one academically with a 98.7% average overall. I was number one physically in all the physical fitness testing, and I was number two in firearms, having never picked up a firearm until I went to the police academy. But that being said, it also dealt with your leadership. So when I was selected to be the honor recruit, for me, it was quite an honor. However, people used to ridicule me because they thought I was ridiculous for how much I would study, because their mind was, all you need is a 70%. And, that's the minimum score to pass. But I never viewed it that way. I mean, I was raised, and my hockey experiences were that, everything you attempt to achieve, you give your best effort. And that's what I've always done throughout my life. That's how I was raised, and I've continued to do that even to this day. So, that in a nutshell gives you kind of an idea of where I was at, and what unique experiences and background I brought to my law enforcement career.
So obviously, being a top notch, being on the top of your game, not only just physically, mentally, it sounds like also the diversity of what you grew up with, the family. And I'm not trying to use it in a negative sense, but the resiliency that your parents taught you, or your adopted parents, but your parents, and being able to see people for who they are instead of what color they are, and being able to meet people where they're at because you were pretty much shown, or you were role modeled after your family, and making sure that you were the best possible human that you can be. Because let's be fair, a parent that's actually raising non-kids of theirs, the fostering, having a multiracial family, it's going to be difficult. It doesn't sound like they were doing it for a paycheck, but they were doing it truly out of being more altruistic. And that must have actually bled heavily over to who you were. Being a D1 athlete, that's nothing to scoff at. If anything, that's super admirable. Being in hockey, you guys are very close-knit people. You guys are getting punched in the face, even though it's not supposed to be part of it, but that is definitely part of the game. And then on top of it, it's a small group of dudes that are skating on these little thin things, and they're playing some of the hardest games that they ever played. Going over to the academy, well, I want to be the smartest guy there. I want to be, why aren't you guys also just showing up too? 98.7, damn near perfect, 1.3. And never picking up a firearm, so that means that you didn't have the bad habits of the Kentucky windage and the one eye and turning it sideways, but at the same time, you're paying attention to what everybody else is teaching you. You're being more hyper attentive. You're not just trying to be semi-accurate, you're trying to be damn near accurate. So, first off, kudos to you. And then being in LA, be going to LA from Midwest. LA, I think they're not passing, I don't think they passed Manhattan yet, but they're a super damn city. I've been through there a few times, and I'm like, actually once or twice, and I was like, nope, I'm good. There's way too many damn people. So how was that change for you when you went from a small town to pretty much a mega city?
Well, I left home when I was 16. The town I grew up in was about 24,000 people. It was the city of Kent in Kent, Ohio. My father was a professor at Kent State. And then I went and played junior hockey up in Canada in a town of about 8,000. And I played in for the Dubuque Fighting Saints in the United States Hockey League, and that was about 62,000. So that was the largest city I lived in before moving to Los Angeles. But having left home when I was 16 and then, living away from home, going to college and things like that, the move to Los Angeles in of itself was not overwhelming until I got there. And then my palms would sweat when I would be on the freeway going one direction, 5 lanes. I thought, this is madness. And, it took a little while for me to adjust to just even living out there because it was rare if you heard a foreign language spoken in Ohio. And there you'd be in the grocery store and you'd often hear multiple languages being spoken. And it was something I had to become acclimated to. And, but at the same time, I just loved the challenge. It was something that just really intrigued me. I've always wanted to learn about people, and these were people that, listen, we're all the same. We all have the same emotions. That's what drives us. The difference is that we have different environments in which we come from, and what was helpful for me was having a father who understood that, who was a professor of sociology and who was non-judgmental. I could share anything with my father, and he would just, share his thoughts. And he oftentimes, if I asked him a question about something, primarily law enforcement related in regards to the experiences I was having, he'd often say, well, son, it seems to me you need to consider. And then he'd, tell me what I need to consider, but he never told me what the answers were. He allowed me to figure that out on my own. And sometimes I got it right and sometimes I didn't. But, he really, even at a young age when I was still living at home, he taught me, without me knowing it, actually, how to be a critical thinker and how to challenge the status quo and not be satisfied with how things are just because that's the way they've been done for forever. And your listeners may think that that's not odd, but that is very odd in law enforcement because there's a culture in law enforcement where it's very insular and you don't question the status quo. And when you do, you're recognized or you're considered a disruptor. But, I wasn't, I've never been concerned with what other people really thought of me. I just made sure that how I addressed things was measured and respectful. And I just felt that it was important to always strive to improve. And that requires asking questions and, doubting things at times, questioning if there's a better way to do things. And, my career, I had some very unique experiences with the types of assignments that I had. First and foremost, as an officer, I worked what's called Metropolitan Division. And that's where SWAT's housed and K9 and the mounted unit. And I was assigned to what's called A platoon, which is a line platoon. And we did a lot of extra patrol and critical, violent areas in the city where there have been spikes in crimes. We served high-risk warrants. We did dignitary protection. Anytime the president, vice president, first lady, or any head of state came to the city of Los Angeles, we worked with the Secret Service and the State Department in their security details. And, we were responsible for all the planned critical demonstrations that occurred in Los Angeles, where, as we have seen even recently, that they're rather frequent and can be rather challenging to deal with. But from there, I ended up going to Rampart Division when I made sergeant. And I'm not sure if your listeners know much about Rampart, but in the late 80s, there was a huge scandal with the crash unit, which is the gang unit in Rampart, where they had officers that were committing bank robberies off duty, stealing pounds of cocaine out of evidence lockup and selling it on the streets for personal financial gain, getting involved in shootings and planting guns to justify the shootings. Some of the most egregious type of police corruption you can ever think of. And I was sent to that division as part of the new leadership team to clean things up. And then after being there for a short period of time, the city decided to disband all crash units, but we needed an entity that addressed the gang crime, and they created a new model, which was a gang enforcement detail, where the chain of command was directly to the captain of the division, and I was selected to be the officer in charge of that unit. And because of all these shortcomings and, violations of people's constitutional rights and the systemic issues with the Los Angeles Police Department, the Department of Justice had investigated us, and we went under a federal consent decree, which means you have a judge that is overseeing these mandates that need to be implemented. So I was up to my ears in some critical policing experiences. And, from there, from the gang unit, I changed the model on which we used to evaluate our success. It was no longer the number of felony arrests that we made or the number of guns we got off the streets. It was the number of cases that we had that were filed and conviction rates and amount of time that these violent criminals and the shot callers were being sent to prison for. And the whole model changed, and it became a model to be exemplified by all gang enforcement details throughout the city. And we were recognized for the meritorious unit citation because of our successes. And listen, just because I was the officer in charge, that's not why we had the success we had. The success we had was how seriously I took the selection of the personnel that I brought into the unit. And I like to build people as leaders and give them some autonomy to dictate how we are going to achieve the goals that we identify we need to be striving to achieve. And I give all the credit to the officers that actually worked for me. I was just there to support them. And they were remarkable. But as a result of my success, I then went to go work directly for Chief William Bratton, who had come to us from the NYPD, where he was a commissioner there. And he became our chief of police. And I would brief him on all officer-involved shootings and lethal force cases. And I wrote his rationale for the adjudication of all those cases that's submitted to the Honorable Board of Police Commissioners, because the department evaluates the decision to draw and exhibit a firearm, the tactics that are used, as well as the force that an officer elects to use in the circumstances. So, I had a great deal of experience doing that. And then I became the officer in charge of the detective entity that investigates all those cases. So I had my hands in over 700 cases, but with that came a lot of exposure to trauma and to tragedy and to death. And because not all officer involved shootings end favorably for police officers. And we also have to recognize that 36% of officer-involved shootings involve somebody suffering from a mental health crisis. And you have this phenomenon of suicide by cop. And I've seen those circumstances where officers are put in these tough decisions and they have to make a split-second decision under rapidly unfolding tactical scenarios, wherein they end up having to take somebody's life, and then they find out that it was a replica gun and it was a suicide by cop type of scenario. And that's a heck of a weight to carry. And so I saw the shortcomings in law enforcement when it came to how we train, how we respond to certain types of incidents. And it's not just about serving the public better, but it's about taking care of our officers better, because the hypervigilant training we had towards everything's a threat tended to drive us to be too willing to use force to resolve situations, which then have a long-term impact on you from a mental health standpoint, versus having a different mindset. So it's those experiences that, brought me to write my book in the areas that I felt that law enforcement can improve, because the answers are out there. We just need to get out of this insular mindset that we have our own answers here in the United States or within our own departments. Oftentimes LAPD, it's like if the LAPD doesn't come up with that idea, they don't care. They're not even going to consider what everybody else is doing because LAPD knows best. But they don't. There's things that can be learned overseas from the European countries and the Nordic countries and how they address things and how they hire and how they train and all those sorts of things. So, my book deals with all of that, actionable solutions to improve things, not only for the citizens that we serve, but most importantly for the police officers that wear the uniform and the badge.
It sounds like you have been very decorated from all the stuff that you've been through. But the key component of all was actually that hard work to question, to be able to rely on your own instincts, the thing that your father really impressed on you, to be able to think again. Like Adam Grant talks about that thinking again, being able to go against our own biases or the way that we have been believed. When you said, when we ask questions, we sometimes will get beaten down or will be considered a disruptor. The saying is when a nail is sticking out, the hammer will follow and usually get plugged up. But by the ability to be a disruptor, you were realizing what was actually happening, what was creating these shortcomings. And even if you didn't have the right answers, you had the ability or the wherewithal to be able to start to question it and start to find the right answers. And having I'll say the grit to keep pushing up against it because being a D1 athlete or even coming up, like again, moving when you're 16 and being a leader ever since you were a kid helps you be able to figure this out. Going to multiple different departments, helping clean it up, getting a citation written up as a benefit instead of actually having all these negative things where you said, when we start not just only the complaints being put against us, and that's what the biggest margin started getting, but it was more of how we were able to be beneficial. And you guys were led in a way that the former gang enforcement, they were they were actually the ones committing crimes back in the 60s and 70s. And now you guys are cleaning it up and giving LAPD police officers a good name. That's huge. And then you started to talk about mental health. When you were in the police as the beginning, how was mental health treated? What was the communication on it? Was there any type of support? What was really the motto of the policing of when people decide to say, "Hey, I'm hurting. Can I get some support?"
Well, when I first got on the job, it didn't exist. You didn't. You just wouldn't disclose any of that. And my first division with LA was 77th Division, and that's where the riots broke out, the Rodney King riots in '92, and it was a flashpoint of a lot of um, community hatred towards law enforcement and the LAPD. And it's really about mindset. Every day you'd get beaten down by community members, saying, "Oh, the KKK, blue-eyed, hood-wearing, racist cop," and it just the furthest thing from the truth. For me, I'll be honest. I think part of uh, progression, in order to progress, you got to be honest. And the reality is there is racism in law enforcement, um, and there's a toxic culture that's allowed to persist, unfortunately, um, and that needs to be addressed. But that being said, the vast majority of police officers are well-intentioned, wonderful people that are there to serve and protect the public. And so it's really about mindset. I didn't look at that as law enforcement being victimized by the community. I saw it as an opportunity to take measures to make a difference in ways that may seem very small, but actually are huge. I would go into the projects when I had some downtime, and I'd throw the ball with the kids, throw the football with the kids and things. And really for two reasons. One, so they saw that I didn't see them as the enemy, because they often believe that we saw them as the enemy, them versus us type of mentality, which I never had, but does exist to some extent in law enforcement. But also, um, I didn't want them to view me as the enemy. So I didn't view them as the enemy, and I wanted them to not view me as the enemy. And if I could just reach one kid, then it was worth it, because these kids are going to have challenges. My dad used to always tell me, he said, you were always a go-getter, always a leader and trying to accomplish at the highest level. Just look at your hockey career. And he said, if you grew up in those projects, you probably would have been the guy leading the gang. You would have been the shot caller. And it was just the environment that I had been raised in that gave me different opportunities to allow my leadership and my personality traits to manifest. But if in a different environment, I would have gone a completely different direction, more than likely. And, that is a reality that very many people fail to realize. And we have to understand that we are much more similar to those people that we're policing, even if they come from vastly different types of backgrounds, than we are dissimilar. That is a reality. So I always looked at that as an opportunity. And I used to make a lot of traffic stops, but I gave very few tickets, because I looked at it as an opportunity, not necessarily to cite somebody, but an opportunity to engage somebody in interaction, wherein I could communicate with them. And I often would tell them, tell me a joke. And they tell me a joke, and even if it was a terrible joke, I'd give them a warning and let them go. But what that was an icebreaker. And after you have enough of those stops in any particular neighborhood, you start to develop a reputation within that community, where they're talking about you when you're not around, but in a favorable way. And it makes them more likely to come to you to give you some information about some crime that may be going on, or step forward as a witness to a shooting that may have occurred, and those sorts of things. We're talking about, I was policing in a division that was 7 square miles, and we'd have over 140 homicides a year. So it was very violent. And the only way we could be successful is if we have the assistance of the community members. And how are you going to do that if you keep them at an arm's length? You have to be willing to engage with them, and in any way you possibly can. Because unfortunately, we have to chase that radio because it's so busy. And when you're chasing that radio, people aren't calling you because things are going well. They're calling you because they're not going well. And you're being brought there to fix something, to make things better, to help somebody. And therein lies the problem, because sometimes you can't. You have this sudden infant death syndrome. I handled about 3 of those calls that you have a dead infant, and family members that are just losing their minds emotionally right in front of you, and there's nothing you can do. And we think that we're okay, and that we're tough, and we can kid ourselves for a period of time, but it eventually catches up with you. You can only see so much tragedy and death and sadness. We're not programmed to see what we see as first responders. And if we're not doing the things we need to be doing to take care of ourselves, we're going to become the next tragedy. And, that's a reality that we have to do better addressing, not only individually as officers, but as law enforcement organizations.
There's a couple of things that went to my mind when you were talking about the policing, even in the inner cities. Malcolm Gladwell talks about how certain police forces, they get taught for certain areas of how to police. So inner city, they're looking for certain behaviors, certain tones, certain interactions. What would be conceived to be to be hiding something, to be giving off false evidence, and compared to a place like an inner city or outer cities, like say out in the country. And there was this individual that it was an African American woman. The police officer came from originally from the inner cities. He was stopped her. The behaviors that she was portraying was it was like being dishonest, being untrustworthy. And where she was stopped was about, I think, 20 miles outside of the inner city, which was more in a very rural area. And the incident went very wrong. And it was because of his understanding his biases and the way that he was taught. And he was not really seeing it from a different narrative. And the way that he shares his story of what happened, it was definitely an injustice. And the police officers, they were getting taught to be more predictable outcomes. For me in the Marine Corps, when we were overseas, my first time, somebody was staring at you too long, you could possibly, hmm, this is gonna be very questionable. If they're videoing you, you can be able to shoot them depending on what the rules of engagement 1 year was. If they were digging too close to the road, you can be able to end their life. And because they might be planting an IED. And these are the preconception biases that we start to look at. But then the other thing that you were sharing, which was integrating yourself more into the communities. I think about the stories about Alexander the Great. When they first went into different countries, they would actually conquer it by force. And he first was trying to get them to not want to be conquered. He wanted their education. Slowly, what he was doing was integrating his soldiers with the women and starting to have kids. And what he was trying to do was change the narrative. We're with you. We're not trying to fight you. And by you playing ball or you saying, "Hey, tell me a joke," I'm not here to conquer you. I'm not here to suppress you. I'm not here to beat you, but I'm here to help you. I really want to help you. This crime that you guys are living in, I don't want you guys to live in this crime anymore. I would love to actually give you the chance to be out of it. You're scared of us because, one, you don't know me. You don't know what this is. You have this belief system behind this uniform that I'm not here for you. I'm only here to suppress you. Your culture has actually told you that police are here just to take away your brothers, your fathers, and to beat you guys down. Where I commend you about the whole thing of saying, "Hey, I'm only here. I want to throw the ball with you. We might be in the worst neighborhood. I want you to see that I'm flesh and blood like you. And I want to meet you with love." And then when you started to talk about the emotional cup of actually dealing with shit, a lot of people will say are not as gritty as you. And Angela Duckworth wrote a book called Grit, and she was looking at about why is some people's PTSD worse than others. Well, a lot of it dealt with, and she studied the West Point graduates, the people that were playing sports and going to work or playing music and getting good grades. They were grittier. They were able to decompartmentalize. They were able to understand things from a multitude of angles. And you're right when you say, hey, if I actually have this thing keep filling up and I'm not able to drain it, it becomes overwhelming. And like you and I were just talking about offline, was how alcohol was something. When I was in the Marines, yeah, alcohol was shit. The Marine Corps was founded in a bar in Tun Tavern, Pennsylvania, 1775, November 10th. I would join the cult. I drank the Kool-Aid. And, well, you're upset, you drink. You're sad, you drink. You're happy, you drink. I wonder, and I was sharing about my brother and what your insight was about alcohol, where I said he had two trash cans, one for his Coors Light and then the other one for his trash. You kind of laughed about it when I first said that to you because I think that might have resonated. What was the attitude about drinking in law enforcement, at least for you guys?
Well, it is pretty similar to what you were saying. You're happy, you drink. You're upset, you drink. You're dealing with a stressful circumstance, or you may have been shot at or whatever during your watch. You go and drink. And I partook in that. we would, when I worked Metropolitan Division, we'd do our high risk warrants. It was what would be called mission specific, where we worked 8-hour days, but we would, have to be at work at say 1:30 in the morning, and we do the briefing and go to location and hit it. And when we were done, we went in to watch, but we got credit for a whole 8 hours of work. So we would go somewhere and drink. And, it wasn't unusual to have 16, 24 beers. And you're a young man and you can do that and wake up the next morning and run 6 miles. But that's not healthy. And the one thing for me was um I always had my dad. My dad was a very wise and insightful individual, and we always were checking in with each other. And he kept my mind right, I guess is the best way for me to put it. He gave me perspective, and he continually imparted on me the importance that I have a life outside of law enforcement, that I have friends that have nothing to do with law enforcement, and that I spend time with them just as I spend time with people that I work with. Because, just in my hockey career, like in college, you know, you, I lived with hockey players. I went to classes with hockey players. I went to hockey practice with hockey players, and I played games with hockey players. You better have friends outside of hockey, or you're going to have a very imbalanced experience in your college career. So, the same thing can be said about law enforcement. So, that was something that helped me quite a bit. I made a concerted effort to have friends that weren't in law enforcement and actually challenged my thought processes relative to the things that I was experiencing in my career. Um, I've always been an athlete. I've always held myself to a high standard of physical conditioning. And, I'd get up Sunday mornings and run 15 miles before the sun would come up. And that was a way for me, not only to help stay fit, but stay mentally sound. It was very just peaceful. It's like my dad said. My dad was a marathon runner, and he said that he started running when we kids came along. It's how you help yourself stay sane. But these practices as individuals still isn't enough. The organizations need to make a change where there's not this stigma for asking for help. And one thing that I did when I was working for Bratton, um, writing his adjudication recommendations for officer involved shootings and lethal force cases, was I created a debrief model that is still in existence today, and they're using it today. Wherein if you're identified as being substantially involved in one of those lethal force critical incidents, that you're mandated to go see behavioral science services, not just once to check the box, but you have to go multiple times and you're removed from the field. And that's all confidential. So, if you are having an issue, you can in confidence share it with somebody that can help you. And your commanding officer is not entitled to know what's being told to the person you're speaking with. So that is a step in the right direction. However, the reality is I know of people that have been diagnosed with PTSD while still on the job and told by behavioral science services, you can't let the department know because your career will be over. And I've seen people that have said that they were having problems and then they have their guns taken away and become part of what's called the rubber gun squad. And the reality is things are now worse than they were before they even actually went to initially go get help. And to get them back to be righted where they have their firearm and they're working as a full capacity police officer again takes forever. And I understand the legalities and the liability associated with that the city and the police department has to worry about and consider. But at the same time, you're dealing with individuals, and unfortunately, those individuals all too often end up getting the short end of that judgment stick, so to speak, wherein decisions that are made certainly are not optimal for the individual that's actually experiencing and suffering the difficult times. And I've seen that. I've seen it. I had a guy that worked for me in the gang unit who promoted and made detective, and unfortunately, as you see in law enforcement all too often, the deterioration of his family life. His marriage was dissolving, and he had kids, and the stress of going through all of that, he made the decision to kill himself. He shot and killed himself, and it's crazy because I remember talking to him in the locker room a few weeks before he killed himself, and he seemed to be doing okay. It's tough because people sometimes get really good at saying all the right things when you're checking in to make sure they're okay. And more than once, um, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, I've been fooled. I had an officer that worked for me at Rampart when I was a patrol sergeant there. We worked morning watch, so throughout the night we would get off at like 7:30 in the morning. And it was a Friday night, and they were giving the sergeant's exam the next morning. And his partner was scheduled to take the sergeant's exam. So I allowed his partner to go home early, get some sleep before taking the test. And I gave this particular officer an option. I said, you can work the desk to finish the watch, or you can go home early as well. And he chose to go home early as well. And unfortunately, he gets home and his two young daughters were in bed, but his wife was nowhere to be found. And then it turns out she was having an affair. And he ends up moving in to his partner's guest room. And then one weekend, his wife was in Vegas and he got in an argument with her over the phone. And it turns out she was in Vegas, not on business, but with her new boyfriend. And while on the phone, he drew his service pistol and shot and killed himself. And what made that so tragic is that 2 days before, I had seen him we were training immediate action rapid deployment. Those are the tactics that you use for active shooter scenarios. And I checked in with him and he looked great. He was eating well. He was working out. He said he had never had a better relationship than he was having at that time with his father. He had the church and the clergy that he was, in close contact with, and things were going well. And then 2 days later, he killed himself. So, unfortunately, I've had those experiences where, there's people going through some tough times. You're there to help support them, and they ultimately make the decision that they make. I guess the tough part is having to realize that that's their decision, and that I'm not responsible for it. But that takes a toll on you. Takes a toll on you.
It does. What did I miss? What did I miss? What did they say? Did I not feel like a close enough friend? Am I just checking the box when I'm asking these questions? Or they have to lie to me because they don't feel like I'm be able to be trustworthy? Is it do we have a lot of times where we start to internalize what is actually happening around us? Because we're able to replay these moments over in our head over and over again and never be able to have definitive answers. We become more hypervigilant. You're an A personality. You want to be perfect at this stuff. You don't want to miss this stuff. You want to be able to be the best version of yourself because it's not just for you, it is for your buddies. It is for the police force. It is for the community. And the people that are working with you, working underneath you, even working above you, rely on you. But at the same time, it's what am I not giving them the space to be able to talk? Because while you're talking about this, I was thinking about holy shit. These two examples really sad. And then also What was the building blocks of not being able to connect with their wives? Because to me, suicide is the end result to a lot of other situations. How can we be able to rewind it so that their rock bottom is not actually squeezing a trigger? Being in law enforcement or being in the military or being where I live right now, firearms are part of our lives. It's a very intimate relationship that we have with it. It is a tool that we use. And sometimes that tool is used on ourselves because we want to eliminate that threat. We want to eliminate that problem. And it sucks. The aspect that I think about, and I'm curious your perspective, you say that you go see a behavioral health science expert, like a social worker, a psychologist, or LCPC, a few others. But how many of the guys have actually been taught how to open up and be able to discuss their problems, to be able to understand and identify the emotions that are really stuck? Because sitting on a couch, at least for me, when I first started sitting on a couch, I didn't know how to ask for help. I say, I'm here. I'm showing up. This is what I'm told to do. Not be, you fix me. Well, how am I going to let you in because you don't know what the hell I've been through? You have a black and white receipt. You think you understand what I've been through, but do you know how it is to fire a pistol? Do you know how it is to actually be going to a house and seeing it on fire? Do you know how it is? But I'll say from my personal situation of, do you know how it is to be shot at? Do you know how it is to be almost blown up? Do you know how it is to actually just every fucking day waking up, don't know when it's just going to happen? Everything is over. And then coming back to this world that we think is safe. And I didn't have the brotherhood back then to be able to help me understand because a lot of us didn't. In the police force, where the the thing that you wrote up that's still in play are these guys actually met with other former law enforcement or law enforcement that have been through therapy, and what we at the VA we call them peer specialists in other areas of actually saying, hey, these are some of the areas you need to talk about. You need to get kicked in the dick over here, metaphorically speaking. Talk about these situations that are hard, understanding the emotions that are stuck there.
Yeah, for me, what really helped for me was just being honest and sharing how I felt about something. And the progress that I was able to make was then realizing and being led to the understanding that what I was going through was normal. Because you oftentimes, like, my first shooting incident in the 77th Division, AK-47 rounds being shot at me. And, it was unbelievably stressful. And, I had sleeping issues. I couldn't sleep. I had diarrhea, you know, um, I was irritable. And even though I was still doing all the things I would normally do, which, eating well and, working out and those sorts of things, I still was having these problems over a period of time. But when you're told that it's normal, that for me, I guess, helped me then be more honest about going deeper. Um, so that's what worked for me. But the problem really is that it's the culture. I've always marched to a different drummer, and I've just and luckily so. Um, I see some of the guys that I worked with throughout my career, and they're now retired and they have unbelievable health issues and things, and it's not that they didn't have the same level of commitment to working out and those sorts of things, but they like their course light, and they had different ways of managing their stress. And I guess it had a lot to do with how they perceived their role and what their responsibilities were as a law enforcement officer. And over time, when I first got on the job, I would say that the mindset was more that we were guardians, that we were there to serve and protect. And it kind of over time, law enforcement became quite militaristic. And that changes the mindset that the officers have, whether it's conscious or unconscious. The mindset changes. I live in a small community now, about 4,100 people, and the police department that serves us here, they have these external ballistic jackets with all their, tasers and all their tools that they use on it and stuff. They look like they're in Beirut, for goodness sakes. And that's something I just don't quite understand, because we need to we need to have a better self-awareness in knowing how this impacts how we perceive ourselves and our role to the community that we serve. And that can be quite toxic, I think. Um, there's a lot that law enforcement needs to do, because the reality is we don't, as individuals, inherently know how to address these mental health issues. We just don't. And it's unfortunate that our law enforcement organizations are not equipped or designed to protect us, and oftentimes to protect us from ourselves. And, it's, that's where I think there's a great deal of work that needs to be done. I dedicate pretty much an entire chapter to this in my book on thin ice, about the mental health and of law enforcement officers and the responsibility that the organization has to officers. And there are some agencies that are doing things a little better than others, and something can be learned from them. But unfortunately, law enforcement's so insular, we tend not to look outside of our own organizations. And Dallas is one organization that's doing things quite well, and they've had quite a bit of success, where people are coming forward, and there's funds there for people to get help on their own with, the confidentiality that they need to feel comfortable doing it with no questions asked. And, people that are broken are being made whole again, and their careers are prospering and they're promoting. And those are the types of things that are going on in Dallas. Other law enforcement organizations need to heed that model, and try to replicate it.
So let's transition into your book about, you say you wrote a chapter on it. And what were you trying to help convey to the people that would read this book? And why is it important not for only just police officers or their family to understand it, but for all readers to understand why you wrote this book and the real message that you're trying to convey?
Well, in regards to that particular chapter, it's kind of like what I talked about, what I was trying to accomplish on the streets, where I would pull people over and have them tell me a joke. It's about the community understanding and humanizing us as law enforcement officers, because just as law enforcement officers have to recognize that we are not all that different than the communities and the people that we serve, um, that it's true, it's reciprocated the opposite direction as well. Community needs to realize that police officers are not that different. And in writing it, it's a book about how to create a healthy, good officer. How do we do that? And then there's another chapter where I talk about the organization. But when you're looking solely at the officer, what sort of things do we need to be looking at, and what areas can we improve upon that will help the officers long term, and then in turn the citizens that they serve? Because your a police officer is going to only be as good as they are taking care of themselves. So if you're not taking care of yourselves, you can't take care of the community that you're serving, because the trauma and the troubles and turbulent relations you're going through in your personal life and your professional life is going to manifest in your judgments and your actions, and your decision making while serving the public. And so it's a win-win for everybody if we better understand each other.
So it sounds like you're having people be able to have a little bit behind the culture to be able to understand that it's not just the culture, the individuals behind it are trying to help out. And it's a nice way for people to have more empathy for each other and realize that we are here to help. We're not here to just hurt. You talked about militarization of the police department. To be honest, if I see a guy wearing Kevlar and having a bunch of mags on him, I'm like, wow, this is where we're at right now. You're trying to show me that we're at a war. Like, I remember that outfit. I remember that. So, are we really going to be able to communicate? Or are you just going to be used also using more of aggressive language towards me? Or are you going to have more of aggressive posture? Because right now, my interactions with you is really going to be heightened because I'm looking at you as a person I'm trying to avoid because it's just the posture, it's just the uniform. Like being in the Marine Corps, I remember telling people, "Oh, look off, stop, or imshi, go away." And we didn't have that type of dialogue. It was the hearts and minds of what General Mattis, James Mattis, was trying to do was to help people realize that we are there. We wanted to overthrow a regime. But then you have a bunch of individuals that are hmm, more worried about their own ass, that they are not there for the whole, and they're creating more of a ripples that's turning into waves, that's turning into more of a hostile environment. Because you got individuals that are not there mentally or emotionally being able to connect with these people. So I do commend you for actually trying to address it from both sides and helping out to realize that we're more than just a badge. We're more than just the blue, but we're here to actually we want to work with you. We want to actually see the best version of yourself go through. So with all that being said, what is your favorite chapter of that book? Why?
It's a good question. Um, the one that gets me the most is a chapter about my upbringing. Uh, my mother passed away when I was 16 from brain cancer, and she was a remarkable woman, unbelievably strong, and had an impeccable influence on my life and the direction my life took and who I ultimately became. She was a highly educated woman. She was a chemist for DuPont, and she decided to forego her career to have children because she felt that raising children was the most important thing she'd ever do. And, but she was very civically minded. She was the president of the League of Women Voters. She was a city councilwoman. Um, both of my folks were the co-founders of the Kent Environmental Council, which is still in existence today. And it was their modeling that so impressed on me the things that are important in life, and that life is greater than me alone, and that my purpose needs to be to serve and influence for the better. Not what's in it for me, but how can I help impact other people's lives in a positive way. And I still do that today. I mean, I'm a volunteer crossing guard here in town for the intermediate school kids, fourth, fifth, and sixth graders. And, there's no better way to connect because, listen, look at our society. Um, on the job right after Columbine, we sent SWAT members up there to determine better tactics rather than contain and control the scene and wait for SWAT to respond. You have to take immediate action. And we created the immediate action rapid deployment tactics, which we began to train. But within a number of months of Columbine, I was entering my own school shooting scenario in the San Fernando Valley, where over 70 rounds were fired and 5 people were shot, 3 of them children. And that's a reality of our society now. And the number of school shootings that we have that occur on an annual basis is just unheard of anywhere else in this world. And the reality is, um, some things need to really change from our mindset, not only in law enforcement, but as a society.
Mm.
Um, but it's those realities that, statistically speaking, 4 out of 5 school shootings, um, somebody other than the shooter knew that the shooting was going to occur. So then how do we prevent these things from happening? It's about fostering a trusted relationship with these children so they feel comfortable coming to you and sharing with you something that they may know or hear, have heard, or what have you, where we can take proper steps to hopefully try to prevent something from occurring. And what better way than through volunteering in the community as a crossing guard, where every day I see the same kids over and over again. And, you know, just in law enforcement, you got to go out, walk into a room and read it real fast. And how do you do that? You're reading body language. You're reading inflection of voice and tone and that sort of thing. And that's what I do with these children. I know what kid had been bullied that day. I know what kid needs that extra attention on any given day. And then I know the parents, so I can reach out confidentially and let the parent know that something may be going on with their kid that they might want to inquire. But, it's those sorts of things that I just think are really important. And it's about giving back and really being part of the solution and not allowing things to fester and become worse. So, but it was my parents that modeled those things for me. They taught me moral reasoning, critical thinking, and holding myself accountable and all of those sorts of things. And, and just and being honest to the point where you're honest, even if the honesty is going to have negative repercussions for you. Um, that's the reality that you have to live in. There's no really other way to do it. But I guess that's why I would say that that's the chapter. Every time I read it, every time I talk about my mom in the book and I read it and I share my experiences of losing her at 16 years old and the impact that she had on my life, it causes me to cry. So people have read my book, people that I know, um, and it's going to be released September 16th. But people are like, I'm shocked at how much you're willing to share about your personal life. But therein lies the issue. Maybe if law enforcement was more willing to share, we wouldn't have these huge gaps that we need to fill at this point, right? It's about people have to know you, and after they know you, they'll like you, and only then will they trust you. And that's the equation for success moving forward. So we have to make ourselves vulnerable. We have to expose ourselves and share something of our personal lives so people can relate and align themselves and ultimately like you. Because I would suggest that the vast majority of law enforcement officers, if you knew them, you would like them.
Yeah, that's true. Like I said, my brother was a police officer. He was about to retire, ended up dying of a heart attack. And my great grandfather was a police officer in New York City. But what was interesting, my brother Michael had a huge heart. He was a good dude, did martial arts when he was younger. He cared a lot about people, and he saw a lot of times past the facade of what people gave. He was hot-tempered when he first joined the law enforcement area. Like some people are full of piss and vinegar. He was in the same way and then calmed down. Him and I, he was my half brother. He was about 14 years older than me, but I appreciated the time that I had with him. and I appreciated some of the stops that he told me about where he helped out people. He he dealt with his demons, dealt with his alcohol problem, and he dealt with his demons a little bit differently as far as not always getting the mental health. And something I believe in is something that Carl Jung and Jordan Peterson actually talk about, where it's if you really love people, you be the best version of yourself for them. And we're not always taught that. We're not always able to be role modeled. And I like to say kudos to both of your parents. Your parents did a really good job with you. They showed you love, they showed you a lot of compassion, empathy, something that's a trait that's super hard to learn. And even though that you have an A personality, it sounds like you have so much, I actually could feel it. You have a lot of love underneath it. So I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you being in law enforcement for so many years and pushing back against the tide of the cesspool of the distorted sense of what some people had. And I believe that a lot of the individuals joined it for the right reasons, and they've been burned enough, and they were dealing with their own stuff. And seeing kids die or friends losing their lives to suicide and the resentment towards it, and not being able to show up productively every day, what we request for you guys to do to be able to be the best version of yourself. Never knowing exactly what the situation is when you do a traffic stop, or who's coming up to you and asking you what questions, and having to assess the situation in split seconds, and having to push back against your confirmation biases to be able to see them for being a human and their faults, but then also being able to help and direct them. The de-escalation tactics of what you have, the verbal judo, the foresight of you're not just going to change the culture now, but you can change the culture generationally. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to reading your book, and I can't wait to order it. Hopefully, I can get a signed copy from you one day. But yeah, Jeff, continue to keep giving back. The last question I wanted to ask you, and I ask everybody else that's on here, why did you come on here? And what is a message that you would like to share about mental health?
Well, I think it's important that by 33 years in law enforcement, the experiences that I had, they shouldn't end when I retire. Truth be told, that's where it all really begins. I feel a responsibility to share the vast experience that I have and the insight that I have with the largest span and scope of people I can, to make larger the influence that I can have for the better of everybody. And I bleed blue, and many people will be critical of things that I say because I'm honest about my experiences. And law enforcement does not have the best history. There's flaws in law enforcement that need to be addressed, but we can't become the best version of ourselves in law enforcement unless we're honest about our experiences and where we stand today and where we have been in the past. And so it's just really important that I take every opportunity that I have to share of myself and of my experiences to, again, hopefully humanize law enforcement and allow those law enforcement listeners to know that it's okay to be human and to feel vulnerable. And for those people that aren't in law enforcement and may not necessarily understand law enforcement, that the one takeaway that they have is that we're very similar to them and we're not much unlike them. And we're all in this together. It's not law enforcement's responsibility to figure out how to best police the community. We as a society need to work together. I've always said that it's not about being right. It's about getting it right. And that requires having diverse opinions and experiences and backgrounds at the table, and having the tough conversations. And then and only then will we maximize our ability to be the best we possibly can be, not only in law enforcement, but as a society. So it's a long answer, but that's really why I'm doing what I'm doing today and why I'm on the show.
Well, like I said, Jeff, I appreciate it. I know that I want to be mindful of the drop dead time. I know you gotta go do your duties and continue to keep on giving back to the community. Jeff, again, thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you.